Hello, welcome Pradeep ji. Welcome to the live session today on Vijay Exports Mastery YouTube channel. Let's wait for a few minutes for some more people to join, and then we can start the session today. So, friends, in in these sessions on Vijay Exports Mastery YouTube channel, our objective is to discuss and share the aspects of exports that are very useful for exporters, whether they are new or established. So, in the past, we have conducted many sessions on this channel. The topics were chosen based on the feedback from the audience. We had taken up certain case studies also in these sessions. So, in today's session, friends, we are taking one very interesting topic, that is the history of international trade. So, friends, these topics are very rare topics. Normally, you will not find these topics in many of the training programs. But the purpose of these topics are to widen your perspective with respect to international trade. So, by discussing on such topics like history of international trade, that refers to the history of the exchange of goods from one country to another country over the years since the ancient times, or so called the times when we have the history about international trade. So whatever the evidences are available, based on that, if we understand the chronology of the events that happened according to the timelines, according to the understanding how international trade developed over the years, what were the factors, what were the events that resulted into the kind of international trade what we are seeing today. It is very, very important, and it is very, very interesting also, friends, that you have the perspective, you have the knowledge of those events and the development of trade over the decades, over the centuries. So my idea of today's session was to give you certain knowledge, whatever I have researched, whatever I know, and I have prepared this session referring to the history of international trade from the point of view of the development of the thought process of the political thinkers, the philosophers, the economists over the time, and how international trade took cues from those thinkings, those thought processes, or so called theories, or the theories observed the phenomena, what was happening, and accordingly, the thinkers proposed the models. The thinkers talked about the talked about the theories that explained that why international trade happens. So these all these things, all these events are interrelated, and if you have the knowledge about these aspects, it is going to be very, very useful for you for having a broader perspective about the exports, imports, international trade in general. So, friends, if we talk of the ancient times, as per my research, What I have understood that since the time immemorial, we know that the exchange of goods was happening between the continents, between the civilizations. So, as far as, suppose if we talk of the Indus Valley civilization, that is the main remnants of which are at present there in Pakistan near Larkana, about 50 kilometers from Larkana city in Pakistan. This place is there, which is called Mohenjo-daro. So Mohenjo-daro is a Indus civilization uh, referring to 2000 before Christ. So so the last people living in that civilization were somewhere in 1900 2000 BC. So before that, there are evidence that they were doing international trade with civilization in Mesopotamia. You know that the known places where the people were having this civilization. So almost 50,000 people were there in Indus Valley, this particular place, that is the Mohenjo-daro. What is it called now? Near the Larkana city. So there are evidences and there are goods that are found in the excavations at that places, and they came from Mesopotamia. So this trade was happening. Now the question is that how it was happening. So what we know today, we have many ways of doing international trade. So what kind of trade was happening that time? How the exchange of goods was happening at that time? So historians have been debating on that point, and generally what they know, in spite of the fact that the language used at that time, what we find in, for example, in Indus Valley civilization in Mohenjo-daro, so that language has still not been decoded. So there are language available there. There are written material available, but nobody has been able to decode it. But what they know, that the trade was happening, international trade was happening through what we already know, just the exchange of the goods. That is the barter trade. So, friends, it is very, very clear that in the ancient time, the trade was happening through barter. That was very, very common. Now, friends, this had been happening for a very, very long time. And what we know later in India, when Mughals came to India, before that, we know the the Gupta Empire, the so-called Gupta Empire. So we had been doing a lot of international trade again through barters, as well as there were certain currencies also, international currencies also used, and they became popular, that were based on maybe gold, that was based on some kind of agricultural commodities that were rare. For example, there are evidence that in India, as currency of exchange of goods internationally, one commodity, that was cloves, they were used in India as the currency. So cloves could be used as the currency, and it was acceptable internationally. So similarly, there were other types of commodities and certain metals. Those were used as currency. So the idea of this currency had already started in those times. So, friends, what happened? That in the Middle Ages, when the Europeans explored the world through sponsored expeditions, the sea expeditions, they tried to explore the world on high seas, because world had been explored with some sketchy maps. There were global maps with many gray areas that were available, those maps, but those maps were based on the exploration of the world through land routes. So land routes were already there, so-called silk routes. India China was very, very important hub of trade at before that time. So when we are talking of the renaissance of the European industries, and the Middle Ages, and the awakening of the industrial sector in Europe, before that happened, the the main thing what happened was the technology of having these ships on the high seas, and sailing them on the high seas, and exploring the world through seas, high seas. So the global maps became even more clearer, more better, that were before created through silk routes or the land routes. And land routes, friends, were having a lot of limitations. The cost of transaction, international transaction, was very heavy. So I hope you already know that the link between European continent and Asian continent was through the present day Turkey, that is the especially the Istanbul. So that was the seat of the Ottoman Empire. So Sultan the Great. Sultan the Great was having the background of you know taking taxes of the people going from Asia to Europe, and people going from Europe to Asia through land routes. So the result was that the cost of the goods for moving from Asia to Europe or from Europe to Asia through land routes was becoming at least twice, even more, because of these taxes by Sultan the Great. So Ottoman Empire, that was the result of the Ottoman Empire's becoming so rich. So land route had become very costly, and they were not really practical. So the advancement of the ship technology and the exploration, sea exploration by the Europeans of the world, and what we know of Vasco da Gama's expeditions to coming to India, or the Columbus going to Latin America, and so many routes were explored. The world became shorter on those on the bandwagon of on the back of these expeditions that were relatively more cost effective. They provided more power, international trade power, to European countries. And because of this international trade power, which was the result of the sea technology, ship technology, the expeditions of the Europeans, not only Britishers, before that, Dutch expeditions, before that, Danish, Portuguese, even French, what we know, the Puducherry in India, that was the French colony, and we had the Danish colony in Vijayanagar near Kolkata, and we have Diu and Daman, the Portuguese, and the British, of course, East India Company. So all these European expeditions and the sea power, and the fact that Ajayji, welcome, good evening. So we are talking of the we are discussing the history of international trade based on some of my research, so that you get a better view, better understanding, and you have the understanding of the past events that resulted in the kind of international trade what we do today. We are discussing that part. So I was talking about the newfound sea power of many of the European nations, on the back of which they could really do a lot of international trade and make a lot of money. On the back of that, the industrial revolution materialized in European countries, because they could import raw material at very throwaway prices on through sea routes, bring it to European nations, and add value through machines, through industrial revolution. What has happened, so-called the example of matchbox making using phosphorus, that was very uh, scandalous and very bad. Many women died in Britain due to the use of phosphorus. So there were many things happening, industrial things were happening, people were dying, but they were making money, a lot of money. And the motivation of making those money resulted into more industrialization in these countries, European countries. And on the back of the high income from exports from European countries through sea routes, high seas. And this power was with the European nations because of the ship technology, because of their capability to connect with the world through sea routes, away from the land routes, which were that were very very costly. Land routes took a lot of time. It was, a lot of taxes were there of the nations in between. So land routes were not practical. So European countries made a lot of money, friends, through the sea power, and on the back of it, so much of big revolution and happened. Industrial revolution happened in these countries, whether it was Britain, whether it was France, whether it was Portugal. So all these countries did a lot of innovations. They created a lot of machines because of the motivation of making more and more money out of this newfound technology of the connecting with the world through sea. So friends, what happened at those times, middle ages time, when European power both at the sea as well as at home through industries, they were making a lot of money. The idea of mercantilism was coined. What was the idea of mercantilism, which is called the first known explanation of international trade, the so-called mercantilism, the meaning of which is that the idea which was coined by the political thinkers, philosophers, and economists. I would not say economics because it was not really economics. So that time the mercantilism meant that any country, whichever European country, it may be Britain, it may be Denmark, but it may be Dutch, it may be France, if they accumulate more gold, so gold is used in international trade for selling the goods. So in order to sell the goods, the industrial items which were sold to the all over the world, they were collecting gold. So the mercantilism says that the country which will be able to accumulate more and more and more gold will be more and more rich, and they will more and more dominate the world. That was the idea of the mercantilism. Now, friends, this is this is a major twist in the international trade events. So when, according to mercantilism, these countries were exporting their high value items and importing raw material at throwaway prices, very cheap prices. So a lot of money was coming in the form of gold. So what happened to further increase profits? They created companies like East India Company or many other uh, different names. East India Company was of Denmark also. East India Company was also of Dutch also. East India Company was of Britain also. So Britain was the last in the row, coming in the row. Before that, Portuguese people had already collected a lot of gold from Latin America. So that was the bus which was missed by Britishers. So they actually did not land in Latin America, they landed in North America where there was no gold. So India was the only solution for Britain, and they tried to capture India and many other colonies. So, friends, what I'm trying to tell you, that starting with the international trade, export of goods through colonialism, supported by the political bigwigs of these countries, including the Queen of Britain. So they created something like British Raj, like what happened in India, and these imperialism benefited this theory of mercantilism in order to sell goods at higher price and buy raw material at very low price. Without the political backing, that was not possible. So the result was very high level of competition among European countries to create colonies all over the world. Whatever may be motivations, whatever they may say. But ultimately, it was the main aim was to collect gold according to the theory of mercantilism. So, friends, this was the era of imperialism that was connected with the international trade, that was connected with the theory of mercantilism. So, friends, going forward, now what happened? When these countries that became colonies of these European powers, including India, including Fiji, including Latin America, including even North America, so many. So, British, for example, if we talk of the British regime, the colonies were all over the world. So, these countries were accumulating lot of gold according to the theory, but the problem was that this was not sustainable. Why it was not sustainable? Because there was a backlash from these colonies, including India, including many other, uh, even in Africa, in Latin America, in Far East, Fiji, even China. So the backlash was there. Why? Because of this theory of mercantilism, the gold was going to these countries, few countries in Europe, and who were the losers? Who were the countries that was losing gold? Were the colonies. So they were losing gold. So in other way, they were losing money, and they were selling their goods at very cheap price. They were exporting goods at almost cost price. So no profits. So backlash was imminent. Now, because of this backlash, and because of the question of ethics, because of the question of morality that was missing in this theory of mercantilism, it was not sustainable. So slowly and slowly, the era of mercantilism was receding. The era of imperialism was also receding. It was very, very clear. It took time, but it was not sustainable. That is when the the idea of losing into international trade, or the international trade totally vanishing, except for the necessities, uh, made the life of these international trader, very difficult. So they thought that to how to manage now. So why international trade should happen without the colonies, without the forcible exports of high value, high cost goods. So that was not working. It was not sustainable. So that is when, friends, the so-called father of the economics, Adam Smith, came out with the ideas that international trade can still happen, and there is no need of the theory of mercantilism. The international trade, he wrote a book, Wealth of the Nations. So according to this book, he suggested that the countries all over the world, whether they are colonies, whether they are ruling countries, all were benefit from international trade if they focus on their absolute advantage. So the idea of the theory of absolute advantage came from this book, The Wealth of the Nations, authored by Adam Smith in the 18th century. And the idea was that if all the countries focus on what they can produce better than the others using the same limited resources, that is the absolute advantage, then everybody will benefit. International trade will happen. So there is no need to worry, there is no need to panic. Even if the colonies are not there, even if the imperialism is not there, even if the European countries do not forcibly compel the colonies to buy goods at high price, it's not required. International trade can still happen. All the nations can benefit. The wealth of all the nations will increase if the focus is there on the absolute advantage. Now, that is where, friends, Another scientist later on, Swedish scientist, came out with the idea of comparative advantage. So he extended the ideas of Adam Smith by saying that the countries, different nations of the world, they not only have the absolute advantage, they have the absolute advantage not in one item but in multiple items. So, for example, India may be having absolute advantage in 10, 15 items. UK may be having absolute advantage in 10, 15 items. Another country may be having absolute advantage vis-a-vis others in another set of items. So, according to Ricardo, the idea of comparative advantage was floated that if these countries focus on not all items where they have the absolute advantage, but focus on in few of those multiple absolute advantages where they have the comparative advantage. The meaning of which is, suppose a country has absolute advantage in 10 items, but in two items they have absolute advantage of exemplary nature, which means they can make it much better than the other eight items. So they should focus on those two items and leave the other eight items for the other countries, the other best countries. So the idea is, because of this comparative advantage, friends, they will have the surplus of those goods because they are focusing on few items and they are not manufacturing the other eight items, which is being manufactured by some other country. So obviously international trade will happen, and obviously the wealth of the nations of all the of all the nations on this planet will further increase. So friends, these two theories totally changed the idea of the international trade, and because of these theories, or vice versa, so it is debatable whether theories came first or whether the international trader themselves understood this idea. So nobody can really tell for sure that whether the theories resulted into this phenomena or it was a natural phenomena because on the basis of which these theories were made. So nobody knows about it. But whatever it is, the result was that the imperialism or the colonialism became obsolete. Now, this is part of the international trade history I'm trying to explain to you as per my research. So I'm not saying that you know this is something totally written history. No, absolutely no. It is purely based on my own knowledge, experience, and my long association with international trade. What I know, that this was the time when Adam Smith or David Ricardo, all these people came out with the idea, whatever. That time, the idea of imperialism looked to be obsolete, and international, at least international trade, did not require imperialism. And it was very, very clear that the economic thinking of absolute advantage and comparative advantage were enough to motivate and compel the countries to trade internationally. And friends, from this idea, which was sustainable, which was acceptable to all the countries, whether they were the colonies or they were the ruling parties, whatever parties they were, everybody was happy because everybody was bound to get the benefit of international trade because of these ideas. So, from friends, from there on, what we know today, we have reached very far now, and the supported by the advancement in transportation technology, advancement in the communication technology, advancement in the so-called industrial revolution, which is not confined to European countries. It has already spilled over to countries like China, and now spilling over to countries like India, Vietnam, or Malaysia, or even African countries. Now it is spilling to countries like Kenya, spilling over to many countries in Africa who are now getting industrialized the way it had happened earlier, maybe in a better way, because with better technology. So what is happening, friends? These technological advancement, what we have seen, especially after World War One and World War Two, after those major events, and another very important thing, after World War Two, the humanity has seen the longest period of peace just before the Russia-Ukraine war, which has the potential of a third world war. So, up till now, whatever had been agreed in the form of the Bretton Woods organizations like United Nations or IMF or World Bank, so whatever these organizations had achieved, the biggest achievement had been that the world has seen the longest period of peacetime after World War II in the known history of humans. And this is the period which coincided with the unprecedented advancement in transportation of goods from one country to another country on seas or by air, with very, very large ships, motherships, that can carry almost 500,000 metric ton one ship, and very big aircrafts that can transport very big quantities of goods comparatively. So these advancement in technologies and the globalization of the financial institutions, the availability of the hard currencies, the convertible currencies like US dollar or yen or euro, that are acceptable and that can be used instead of gold. So, friends, what we have seen in the last 4 5 decades, what we have seen, friends, is something that was unthinkable. And where we have reached, friends, at the moment today, when we are we are the master of the world, and international trade is at its peak. We are consuming the daily use items. We don't even bother which countries they are made. You know, daily items are there, affordable items. The mass production, because of this technology, we are able to use daily items manufactured in Vietnam, manufactured in China, manufactured in Thailand, or many other countries, and many things manufactured in India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a very, very big exporter of textiles now. So Bangladesh is has progressed. So many countries who are not in the foray, who are not the players in international trade, are now players in international trade. And this is the shift of power from the west to east. So rise of east. So it is so called rise of east. And what we are seeing today, this rise of east is coinciding with the largest democracy of the world, which is India, and the not so democratic country like China. So China rise is not sustainable because of the political mismatch. So this rise of East will benefit countries like Pakistan. It will benefit India. It will benefit many South Asian countries and many Central Asian countries that include, the neighbor of Russia. All these countries are benefiting from this international trade. But friends, where we have reached at this point, now the question is that we talked of the unsustainable ideas of the European countries with respect to the imperialism or the forced trading, international trade through forced means and tactics. So that did not work. But even today, friends, what we are doing are also not sustainable. So this high level of technological advancement, high level of the sea power or the air power, or the what we already know that we have the mass production of the type never thought before. So that is creating problem for the very existence of the humans on this planet. So we are forgetting about the unsustainable nature of this progress, which is not sustainable, definitely not sustainable. So we are we are moving too fast. So this international trade requires further thinking. So I'm not saying that the international trade should come down, it's not needed. But how to do it? Do we have to really damage our seas for the international trade? So can there be better ways of doing it? Can there be better ways without damaging the seas? That is that is the core of this planet. So people have to live on this planet because of the many role which the high seas they play. They are not for the transportation. They are not the railroads for moving goods. The purpose of seas is not moving goods, friends. The purpose of this sea is to sustain this planet. So we now require another revolution of thinking, another advancement of the human mind to find methods of the sustainable progress. So, what the progress we have seen, friends, is also not sustainable. So, friends, these new theories, international trade theories, whether it is the Porter's diamond model, or whether it is the strategic advantage theory, or whether it is the product life cycle theory, or whatever the theory you can talk about, those theories will help the multinationals to make more money, no doubt about it, and they are making a lot of money. But that money also is not forever. It cannot They cannot make money forever. Because why they cannot do? Because like imperialism was not sustainable, like the forced international trade was not sustainable, even the today's globalization has to find better ways of doing it, sustainable ways of doing it. So this is my as per my research, what I know, this so-called international trade requires a new thought process and new ways of doing international trade. That's the most important part of the present situation. So this present situation uh, is resulting into the signals from the nature in the form of COVID-19 pandemic, or the people like few people making mistakes like what Russia has done. So what China could be doing. So these are the signals of the nature that you are sitting on nuclear weapons, you are sitting on the international sea major routes. They are damaging the seas, and uh, many things are happening that are not sustainable. So so-called climate change, what we are seeing, the result of climate change, we are seeing the extreme weathers. These are all, friends, signals that the international trade of the kind, it's not that international trade is not required, it is okay, required, but how to carry it out, that method is not sustainable. So that has to be worked out, solutions have to be found out, and it cannot be done through wars, it cannot be done through the nuclear weapons. So that is not possible. What can only be done, that is, these are very big issues that has to be thought in the G20 or G7, whatever platforms are there. United Nations is there, and many other organizations are there, international platforms are there. They have to be thought over it, and the world has to get united to find solutions. That is more important. So, friends, whatever I've discussed with you, that knowledge is very, very important for anyone who is in international trade. So, they should be sensitive and they should be aware of the positives as well as the negatives, the bright side and the dark side of international trade. So, your knowledge should be 360-degree knowledge. You should be aware of the pitfalls and the benefits of international trade and how it has to be carried out. So that was the idea, friends, of my today's discussion related to the history of international trade. So, in a very short way, I have tried to give you a chronology of the events, starting from the ancient times to the present times, and some questions I have raised for the future of international trade. So that will decide the future of international trade, and that will decide the future course of action in respect to the way the world has to do international trade. So, friends, this is these are the ideas which I wanted to share with you. If you have any questions, you can ask. Otherwise, we'll meet in the next session. Uh, and friends, due to certain professional reasons, so I I am needing more time on some projects. So I'll be having my next session on Monday. So I will create the session. We'll not be able to do it tomorrow. So the next session will be on Monday, and I'll create the session. I'll announce the topic also, and we can discuss. So instead of having many sessions on weekly basis, yeah, thank you, Yusufji, thank you. So we will have few sessions per week instead of having on a daily basis, and have very useful discussions. Okay, CHA. Yusufji, thanks for your session. It's a very good session. So, custom house agents, their roles and their functions, very interesting topic. So, next week we'll definitely discuss on CHAs. And thanks for suggesting, and many thanks for joining this session. You have been very regularly joining these sessions, and my thinking is that we should have very interesting discussions in these sessions, that is useful, that is practical, and that is based on the deep research. So 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 that our discussions are one of its kind, and everybody benefits. So thank you very much again, and uh, 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 I wish you goodbye and good night. We'll meet on Monday. Thank you very much. Bye bye.